Oh, it's draft time, and you're hearing terms like positional value and all of that. I'm going to tell you why you could throw that out of the window when it comes to Ashton Jeanty. We'll talk about it here today on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open, and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You heard what you said. It is your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen, man. And Matt Williamson is here, as always, on Friday from the Peacock and Williamson podcast show to let us know exactly what is going on in the NFL. We'll do that wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you check it out. Whether you watch or listen, we will be there. I don't want you to miss an episode. Make sure you tap in. And today's episode, by the way, is brought to you by Nissan and all the new 2025 Nissan Armada. Man, that is a nice truck. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. It's Nissan Armada stepping in today for us. Here's what we're going to talk about. By the end of the show, we're going to tell you why the Giants should not take a quarterback. At least I'm going to tell you that much. Right in the middle, we're going to talk about how the eval process has flipped in recent weeks. We're going to use two clips. And it's not to take advantage or talk about the people who made the clips, but it's just to talk about how this process is always a very fluid process and your thoughts could change. But at the top, we're going to start with Ashton Jeanty and running back positional value. Here's what I'm going to tell you about value before we get to Matt Williamson. I think sometimes we overuse the word or use it in the wrong vernacular. I think people believe positional value means like if there's a whole bunch of running backs, their value goes up. That's wrong. If there's a whole bunch of running backs, teams seem to wait. They'll say, we can. The term I hate is we can find a guy. Because the guy you're going to find ain't the guy who you pass up. Because it's not just about checking boxes or getting a position. It's about here. It's about who that person is and what he means when you inject him into your franchise. Matty, talk to me, man. Am I on it? Am I in the neighborhood?
Yeah. I even sent a tweet last night. I didn't know we were going to have this conversation that I was watching some Jeanty stuff last night, and I think him and Hunter are clearly the best two players in this draft. And I don't think Carter's a bad prospect, and Ward's obviously a quarterback, and he's going first. But the two top guys, like I always talk about this time of year, if I were to bet on one player to go to the Hall of Fame out of this class, it would be one of those two. It'd be Hunter or Jeanty. Now, I do that in every class. I mean, it's like, who's the yellow
jacket? Right. Yeah.
I mean, who's that one guy? And those are my two picks for this year. Now, I am not a huge believer in running back in round one. And I think a lot of it isn't necessarily position value as it is just dollars and cents. I mean, the Eagles signed Saquon Barkley basically the exact same contract that Gabe Davis signed a year ago. And then they re-upped him to much less than what Dan Moore is making. And obviously he's way better than those guys. But I just pulled up drafthistory.com, and going back to 2015, the running backs drafted in the top 10 are Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. Scrolling here, there's a little stretch where there's not any, and Bijan Robinson. I mean, if Leonard Fournette is the worst of them by a mile, and everyone else is like Hall of Fame or close to it, Jeanty's worth the 6th pick in the draft or wherever you take him because he's that good.
Yeah, Fournette was a bad player when you look up statistically, and he ended up being a better pass catcher than a whole bunch of people thought. It's a very, very interesting conversation. I'm going to use this on Locked On Jaguars. I'm going to tell you right now, but let's hear from the guys on the squad show talking about the running back position. And this was a while back when it comes to positional value, and then I'll give you my spill on it.
Running back, tight end, two positions that I think have a lot of players that could obviously have a big impact for several teams in need of those positions in this year's NFL draft. But Keith, when it comes to positional value this year, does the running back position or the tight end position have the better value?
I'll say the running back position, just because I just did this exercise at Locked On NFL Draft, right? Me and Dame, we ranked our top 10 running backs. And then when I put the list together, I hated it. because I left off like 6 guys that I really wanted to put on the list, right? And I think it just goes that deep. I think you're talking about 15 to 20 running backs to where if they get the right opportunity, they can be good starters that come out of nowhere. I think about, and I know Aaron is going to remember this, but just remember the years of Devontae Freeman, right? I feel like he came out of nowhere for teams, and then he had a stretch where he was one of the best running backs in the NFL, and there's probably 10 to 12 guys that I can say could potentially have that type of career arc to where they're one of the better running backs in the NFL. So I'd definitely say running back.
I agree with him. I think there are a lot of good running backs. I think Detroit has really shown people how you use running backs, right? With the way that they employ their 2 running back system. I'm going to talk about my man Tyler Rowland, who obviously is Locked on Titans, but he also hosts the Madman Tyler Rowland Locked on NFL show that comes on early in the day. And on the barbershop, I come in second. We had a spirited back and forth the other day. And he says that he said something to the effect on the post that Jeanty is not, he's not Derrick Henry. He's not Adrian Peterson. He's not Saquon Barkley. I agree with him. He's not. He's not 6'1", 230 pounds, full of muscles, running a 4.3 freakazoid. But inconspicuous in that, the fact that he went back to Derrick Henry, Adrian Peterson. While Peterson may be one of the most talented backs in the NFL history, there's a back that played at the time that Peterson did that's better, that had a better career. Not the physical freak, probably wouldn't get drafted ahead of him. Ladanian Tomlinson, and nobody ever mentions him. The dude had almost 12,000 yards his first 8 seasons. His first 8 seasons, he had 126 touchdowns and 500 receptions. What I'm telling you is that there's a difference between talent and impact. Now, notice people always compare Jeanty to Emmitt Smith, right? Emmitt is never mentioned as one of the most talented running backs ever. The thing is if a running back is an identity creator, and what I mean by that is he's the dude for the next 6-7 years that's going to touch that ball 28 times, and it's going to cause nightmares, especially if your offensive line is correct. It's going to cause nightmares for the defensive coordinator for the other team because they don't want to get pounded on. They also don't want to get pounded on, put too many people in the box, and then once he breaks through second level, he's gone. And now this opens things up for wide receivers. That's what I think he is. So while he physically may not be as talented as those dudes, his stocky build looks like a durable build. It looks like a guy who can touch the ball a whole bunch, and it could make a team come into his identity and create holes for everybody else.
I love what you said there. The Tomlinson comparison is spot on to me. Low, tough, super agile, big play, passing game, all those things. And you use the word impact. I think that whoever drafts Jeanty changes it gives the entire offense a facelift. It just changes the whole identity of his new team. And I always urge people, like, if you're sitting there watching TV at home and it's 4th and 1 and your favorite team's playing and the other team has the ball and you're like, boy, I hope they don't go for it here. And they go for it. You're like, damn. So in that perspective, like from the Raiders, do you think the Chargers, Chiefs, and Broncos want the Raiders to draft Jeanty? Like, if they go to the podium, Las Vegas Raiders select Ashton Jeanty. Chiefs fans, and especially Chiefs and Chargers and Denver defensive coordinators, as you mentioned, should say bad words.
Yep, they absolutely should. They absolutely should. And Keith said something else. He said, if given the opportunity. A lot of people over the history of the NFL have said Mike Shanahan is the running back whisperer. Yeah, no, he's not. I think it's North Turner, and here's why I say that.
Oh, okay. I like
because Shanahan was good at identifying the cutback, one-cut runners that could play in his system. North Turner, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, coached Emmitt Smith, coached Ladanian Tomlinson. Ricky Williams, when he came out of college, went to New Orleans and didn't look like Ricky Williams, but then he goes to Miami and Norv is the offensive coordinator. He wins the rushing title. Michael Turner, when Tomlinson left, had his career year under North Turner. The best year of the 1 year he coached Frank Gore was the best year of Frank Gore's career in San Francisco. And when he coached Christian McCaffrey, he was MVP. I'm just telling you, there's something about a guy like that that everybody that he touches has the best years of their career under him. And some of them, and a lot of my guys I just mentioned are going to the Hall of Fame. You have to have someone who understands what this guy is and is willing to put him in a position and use him the way that he's supposed to be used.
Maximizing his talent, maximizing his impact. Impact to me is a big word here. Yeah,
it is. It's a very good impact. And I thank you for leaning in with me on the Ashton Jeanty love, because I got to talk about that on my own local show today. Here's
now, wait, super quick. Like, I don't know that I would take him over Joe Alt, but there's no Joe Alt in this draft. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and drafts aren't the same. That's why when people put a number on and say, well, a guy's not worth the number one pick. Well, all drafts aren't the same. So, exactly. You know, that's why you can't use those phrases. We're going to talk about this process. The draft is really weird. I'm going to show you how the eval process is always fluid and it changes. Doesn't mean that guys are waffling. It just means that information comes in and you change. We're going to get to that when we talk about Abdul Carter and the Cleveland Browns and the possibility of them shocking everybody in the draft. We'll do that in just a second here on Locked On NFL. The Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends over at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at our draft prospects to pick one guy that stands apart that we believe showcase the strength, power needed to push the team, whatever team that is for you, forward as we look ahead to next season. We're going to talk about Ashton Jeanty, the dude that we were just mentioning, right? Ashton Jeanty is this week's clear-cut Player of the Week. Look, he's heavy duty, just like the Armada, rugged, conquers the road with capability and confidence, and it allows your team, if you get him, to dream big. And that's what we're doing right now when it comes to Nissan Armada, because they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what I think Ashton Jeanty will do. It's clear that our Player of the Week is here, ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada, any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada Rogue, Pathfinder, or go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, moving along here, rolling on, talking to my man, Matt Williamson here, as we do every single Friday here on Locked On NFL. Matt's former NFL scout, and he knows how to get it done, man. So we're going to play two clips. Both of them involve the Cleveland Browns and my man Spencer German, right? I don't think Spencer German at some point was a big Abdul Carter fan, and I know he believes Cleveland should take the best player available. That would mean my man Travis. I think that you just mentioned, you said Ashton Jeanty, and now we're going to talk about Travis Hunter. Listen to Spencer German here with Locked On Brown.
I just don't think he is a generational player or should be dubbed a generational player coming out of the college level right now. He's a guy who's played he's been a pass rusher for basically 1 year. He played linebacker before that. He's got this foot issue that I do think should be somewhat of a red flag. Maybe it's not concerning enough for somebody not to take him high, but it is something that's notable to the player that he is. That is something that could derail your career and prevent him from ever becoming a great player in this league. But he's smaller sized. People have brought that up. Like, I don't see him as like this can't miss prospect. I think he's really good. I think he's worthy of going in the top 3, 4, 5 picks. But I'm not going to sit here and like make it bigger than it is. And to be fair, like, I don't even necessarily think we can say that about Travis Hunter in this draft. Like, I'm not sitting here saying Travis Hunter is a generational player either. That remains to be seen. But I do think the ceiling is higher on Travis Hunter being that maybe even just slightly than it is for Carter. And part of that is he plays both ways and wants to play both ways. But to even do that to this point in his career, I think speaks to the level of athlete that he is. And so there's something there just intangibly that he brings to the table that Carter doesn't.
You see, I'm all for that. My thing is, I'm not big on two-way guys. The reason why is because it's been beaten in my head by players, former players, coaches, and everybody else that in order to excel, no matter how talented you are, you have to do those reps. That's what they always said about Deion Sanders, that he worked. If you're spending half your time, if you're Travis Hunter working on one position, that means you're not spending all the time working on that other position. And that's why I think they need to focus more on him as a corner and use him as a spot receiver. But I think Spencer's dead on right now when he talks about a little trepidation that some people may or may not have with Abdul Carter.
I 100% agree with Spencer on Carter. I don't agree with either one of you on Hunter. I think he's that special. And boy, did I have doubts. And it took me about last week till I finally said, this guy might be a Tawny. This might be until there is one. No one can do it since Babe Ruth. But until there is, I just can't get enough of watching this guy's tape. I mean, I think he's just more talented than anybody. And I think Carter, he said it very, very well. Like, he's a great prospect. Is he a transcendent prospect? No. I mean, is he Myles Garrett coming out of A&M? No.
I don't think he's Von Miller. I don't
think he's Von Miller. Right.
No.
I think there's 50% of the drafts he might be edge number 2. I mean, I don't think he's a slam dunk every year, first guy off the board at his position. And a lot of it's because of size. I mean, I think if you watch him, he's on the ground a lot. When tackles hit him from the side, like on his shoulder, he'll go flying. I mean, he kind of gets thrown out of the bar at times against big-time players, not against, guys that are going to be accountants and ditch diggers. And again, I'm looking at this through a very fine microscope. I mean, I'm talking about elite players. Now, I would understand if the Browns took him because matching him with Garrett makes the Steelers, Bengals, and Ravens say bad words too. I mean, that's a lot to deal with. And I don't think the Browns are particularly weak at receiver or corner. But Hunter's the better player to me.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, Spencer was talking to the squad show, and they brought up Abdul Carter. I want you to hear this. It's not a contradiction, but what it is just the ongoing evaluation process of the NFL draft.
What do you think about Abdul Carter stating that he should be the number 1 pick in this year's draft?
Well, I mean, when you look at him, and we had Keith on from Locked On NFL Draft last week, who said that pound for pound, he believes Abdul Carter is probably the best overall prospect in this year's draft cycle. And I think when you look at what he can do, he's got a legit case. You're always looking for these guys that can maybe transcend your defense. And Abdul Carter is that type of guy for whoever lands him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super valuable. It was interesting, part of the Abdul Carter press conference today, he was asked about, everyone talks about a franchise quarterback, but what about a franchise pass rusher? And this idea that, what a quarterback is to an offense, a defensive end, an elite pass rusher can be to a defense. I do think there's some truth in that. I still think and I think the Browns are an example of this, the chasm between what having an elite quarterback gives you and having an elite pass rusher gives you, I think is still pretty wide, because you can have that elite pass rusher and he might be worth 1 or 2 wins for you, but a quarterback it changes the game. David, your team is the living testament of that. You get the right quarterback and all of a sudden the Commanders go from, picking number 2 overall to NFC Championship game. So I still think that has to be the target, but I do think the next tier down from finding that elite quarterback is finding that elite pass rusher. And I do think Abdul Carter feels like he fits that billing.
It's one of the reasons why I'm very excited Myles Garrett's coming to Baltimore this offseason in the trade.
That was wishful thinking by Kevin Oestreicher right there, man. But this is correct. Somebody did something the other day, and they upped the sack production of Cleveland, and they said Cleveland would have been 4-13 regardless. I do believe that. Yeah. I do believe if you have a decent quarterback, sometimes that is worth more than having a great pass rusher, just in a vacuum. But you still have to look at the draft process as getting the absolute best player that you can. That's why I'm in agreement with you that if Cam Ward goes number 1, I don't think he's the best player in the draft anyway. But if he goes number 1 because of the positional value of it, I understand. But I'm thinking Travis Hunter probably needs to be the second player off the board.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think it's a bit of a stretch to compare an elite edge rusher to Mahomes or Allen or somebody like that. Absolutely. I mean, they might be second, and they might be second by a wide margin, but it's still a pretty distant second. I mean, the quarterback's just too important. But I get it. I mean, again, I don't think it's a terrible point. It's just a little extreme for me,
Yeah, like Michael Parsons is a great pass rusher.
Right.
If Dak Prescott doesn't play better, Dallas won't win. We've seen it. I mean,
Right,
we've
right,
seen
right.
it over and over. But Dak can play well, and they could have no pass rusher, and they could go to the playoffs. Washington went to the playoffs last year. Lack of a pass rush with a great young quarterback. So everybody's point is valid. Now we get to the New York Giants and what they have to do.
Mm-hmm.
But first, we're going to pause for the cause, but then we're going to come back, and I'm going to tell you why the Giants should not take a quarterback. All right, lots of discussion about the New York Giants. Talked about them earlier this week. Everybody's giving them the Shador. If Cleveland doesn't take Shador, the Giants are going to take Shador. I had a clip from Patty, Patricia Traynor early this week on Locked On Giants, and she explained what the Giants quarterback situation is. They signed 2 veterans, man. When you sign 2 veterans, well, actually, they also re-signed DeVito. Usually teams carry 2 quarterbacks active. Jameis and Russ Wilson are guaranteed to be on that roster, of course, unless they trade them. But if they had any trade value, teams would have just signed them in the offseason. That, to me, tells me that they're not going to take a quarterback. I want you to hear the Squad Show talk about the New York Giants.
Let's say that, you have Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and you don't win games in New York. New York's going to have a relatively tough schedule this upcoming season. Some of the opponents that they're going to face. Having a veteran quarterback certainly does help. But let's say that, ownership in New York decides to move on from Brian Daboll, Joe Shane, and they still take a quarterback in this year's draft. Let's say they take one in round 1. Is there the appeal there? Like, how challenging will that be if you're going to hire your next head coach, where your head coach coming in is not necessarily married to the idea of the quarterback that you just drafted? I don't know if any of our teams have been in this era. Freeman, I'm going to throw it to you first, since your team, obviously, they signed Kirk Cousins, give him the, big time contract. Then they go on to get Michael Penix Jr. That's obviously caused a little bit of some waves there in Atlanta. What is your thoughts here on that situation if the Giants do move on from their coach and obviously the front office personnel this upcoming season?
Well, I think first I'll commend the Giants for not doing learning from the Falcons' mistake, where the Falcons gave Kirk Cousins 2 years of guaranteed money and then moved off to Kirk Cousins before the first year was up. And now they're stuck trying to figure out, what do we do with Kirk Cousins? Are we going to trade him to the Browns? All that stuff. So the Giants basically did the smart thing by basically saying, we're going to give Russell Wilson 1 year of guaranteed money. Jameis Winston being paid like a backup, so that's pretty much nothing. And so if we do get a quarterback, if we do decide to move off of Russ or Jameis and go to that Shador Sanders, presumably, as Keith said, they're not going to be financially debilitated in the future from doing that. So that's a smart move, I think, on their front to
I wouldn't say anything the Giants are doing is smart, because they're doing it with people that might be on their way out. We saw Hard Knocks last year, and while those conversations that you saw Joe Shane have, every team has those types of conversations, but that one was recorded and it bit them in the butt. I think they probably have a little bit of an edict. Draft a universally good player that any team that needs good players would take, but do not take a quarterback. That's what I would tell them.
Here's my theory on how this has gone down for both the Browns and the Giants at 2 and 3. And trust me, their owner, their GM didn't call me up and tell me this. This is just a hunch. I think both owners in those buildings put a lot of pressure on the decision makers months ago. Yep. You guys are drafting a quarterback. Before the world knew, Cam Ward was definitely going 1 and he was unattainable. Hey, this is the year you guys are drafting a quarterback. I mean, that's the only way we can do it cap-wise for the Browns. The Giants haven't had a guy since Eli. You guys are drafting a quarterback. Okay, yes, sir, we'll draft a quarterback. And then you dig in and you do all your homework and you realize you can't get Ward, who's worth the pick. And I think you have to go back to ownership and say, sir, we like Shador Sanders, but he's a tier or 2 below Carter and Hunter. I mean, if you want him to take him, we'll take him, but he's not as good as those guys. Here's the grades we have on both. What would you do? And then owner finally says, yeah, that's kind of dumb. I'm with you. Take the great player. But I do think both those teams could get real aggressive to trade back and end up with Carter and Dart or Hunter and Sanders. How fun would that be? The Browns have a ton of draft capital. They might get to 15 and get a quarterback still, I think that's how both teams approach it. And if you're the GM and Daboll in the Giants, and I can't make that plan work, I at least have 2 professional quarterbacks that might save my job.
That might get us to 8 wins, and then I turn around and look and say, "Look, we're on our way." It's almost like what colleges do when a coach is a lame duck coach, so he just throws a little 190-pound true freshman in with a lot of talent, and they look pretty competitive. You say, "Hey, man, we're on our way now. This is the wrong time to get off. You know, we got this kid for another 2 years at least." That's kind of what I think can happen here with Daboll and them. But I'm glad you mentioned the fluidity of the process of how. At the beginning of the process, you may say one thing, but then you realize after evaluation, something else happens. I want you to hear Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez earlier in the offseason process when they predicted, and Keith predicted 5 quarterbacks to go in the first round. And I know they've changed their tune to this. Check this out.
At number 1, you have Cam Ward to the Tennessee Titans. At pick 3, you have the New York Giants selected Shedeur Sanders. At pick 6, you have Jalen Milroe going to the Las Vegas Raiders. Pick 7, the New York Jets select Jackson Dart. At pick 21, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Will Howard. In this draft, outside of like Cam and Shedeur, everybody looks at, for the most part, people look at the rest of this class as day 2 guys. What in your mind, what went through your mind when you was doing this mock to get 5 quarterbacks in round 1?
There's a high demand for quarterbacks, right? You talking about Tennessee, obviously need a quarterback. Cleveland, you talk about New York, you talk about, Jacksonville will find out this year, but you're talking about Las Vegas Raiders, talking about New York Jets, actually talking about the New Orleans Saints may need a quarterback, right? You have to look at this draft in a vacuum in its own self. And what I'm saying is that if you're sitting at pick 6 or 7, right? When we're talking about true potential all-pro guys, right? It's probably only maybe 3 to 4, right? That you really feel like are all-pro, right? Like you can compare them against the other draft classes of the last 5 years, and they match up with those guys too, right?
For sure.
Yep. So the reason that I say that is because if you are the Las Vegas Raiders, you are the New York Jets, right? And if it's like I'm not drafting a potential all-pro, I'm drafting a potential Pro Bowler or NFL starter, right? And the positional need has to add up also. Then why not take a quarterback?
What Keith is basically saying is, let's not wait until the 7th round to try to find our Brock Purdy. Mm-hmm. Let's just eval and find that guy now, someone who can Andy Dalton us while we build the rest of our team to get to the title. But what happens in the process is free agency comes in. You mentioned the Raiders. They got a quarterback that they extended, they traded for. You mentioned the Steelers. It looks like Aaron Rodgers is going to be married to them for at least 1 year. You mentioned the Jets. They've gone in and said, you know what? We believe in Justin Fields. So now that those teams have been pushed back and now they have different needs, that's why you'll only see maybe 2, if that many, go in the first round, and why the draft process from February to right now is so fluid.
100%. I do think Dart will end up there. I don't know that I agree with it, but I would bet that he ends up as a first-round player. Mm. I could see Shuck going in the top 45 or so, early day 2 after everyone, goes away and thinks things over. I don't know that the Jets are totally sold on Fields, but I understand what he's saying too. Like, I don't think it's a very strong draft, and I don't think there's a lot of Pro Bowlers, all pros amongst them. So why not take a quarterback? But I'm not taking a 4th-round quarterback in round 2. I mean, there's a limit to how far we can push these things.
Yeah, there is a limit to how far we can push them. Now, I tell you what, we got to watch all of this stuff, because the thing that we all don't know, and you can attest to this, and this is something I've been harping on. These guys aren't just little pieces on a chessboard. Mm-hmm. When they talk to them in the interviews and they get gut feelings about them,
these 30 visits.
This is what it is. And James Gladstone in Jacksonville says it. A guy that's intangibly rich, when we bring him in, and so many people think, okay, you're going to come in and adapt to our culture. They learned that from the Patriot way. But what these coaches are mainly doing is they're searching for ingredients that's going to make that big pot of gumbo taste better. They want these guys to have their own identity. And what are you bringing to our team? And even though they're all quarterbacks, they're not the same person. You have to understand the human being that you're bringing into your organization. And I think a lot of us in this process from the outside leave that consideration totally out of it when we're sitting here thinking about who teams are going to pick.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's an extremely important part of the process. And, I scouted in the league for 1 year, And I realized very, very quickly that I didn't have the same connections as those other scouts that I was competing with, that knew the lunch ladies and everybody that will tell you about the guys. And then you bring them in your building and you learn so much more. And one thing I just wanted to kind of end on, Wig, is if we're just talking quarterbacks, this is something I think people need to really wrap their head around. When you read the scouting report or someone tells you, oh, this guy's a football junkie, he's first one in, last one out, all those things. Football's the most important thing to him. I say, great. But if you're my starting quarterback, that just allows you to sit at the table. I mean, that just gets you in the door. If you don't have that, you have to be Brett Favre off the charts, crazy talented. You know what I mean? Like that just gets you to ride the ride. I mean, that's not special. They all have that.
Mm-hmm. So Jeff Lageman, who covers the Jags here, longtime New York Jet and longtime Jacksonville Jaguar, said this: the coach doesn't pick the quarterback. He just watches. The team picks the quarterback. Those players will tell you who the leader of that team is, man.
Sure.
And I don't care how talented a dude is. They will show you. It's almost like watching Animal Planet, like nonverbal lions. They will tell you who the leader is. It is a pack mentality in the locker room, and the only people who can determine that are the 52 people in there. That's why they always say, no matter how great a player is, if he's injured and on the sideline, ain't nobody listening to him because he's not out there on the field. That's just the way that it works. You want to find out more about the draft picks, make sure you listen to Locked On NFL each and every day, man. That is Keith Sanchez. That is Damian Parsons. They break it down like you can't get anywhere else. And then we come double back with you right here on Locked On NFL with guys like Matt. Make sure you follow the Peacock and Williamson podcast and check those two out every day. Y'all know this. I don't do this when Matt is on, but usually Monday through Thursday, I'm stealing clips and I'm using them here from Peacock and Williamson right here on Locked On NFL. So that's always a good resource. Make sure you tap in. We appreciate you spending your 30 minutes with us each and every day here on Locked On NFL and across the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great weekend.